Ever since we were kids, Jonah and I had an insatiable curiosity for the forgotten and forsaken places in our small town. Our favorite haunt became the old Hargrove Library, an imposing stone building shrouded in ivy and local legends. They said it was closed abruptly after a librarian was found murdered in the early 90s, her body discovered between the stacks, surrounded by a sea of scattered books. The crime remained unsolved, adding a chilling allure to the place that we couldn't resist. One crisp autumn evening, equipped with flashlights and a shared thrill for the supernatural, we decided to explore the abandoned library. The air was tinged with the scent of decaying leaves as we made our way through the rusted gate, its hinges groaning in protest. The library's front doors were boarded up, but a basement window on the building's northern side had been broken open by previous trespassers. We slipped inside, our flashlights piercing the overwhelming darkness. The air was thick with dust and a pungent smell of mold. "Check this out," Jonah whispered, his light catching on something in the corner. It was a child's doll, one eye missing, staring vacantly at us from atop a small pile of books. It was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us. We ventured deeper, the beam of our flashlights revealing rows upon rows of bookshelves, their contents littered across the floor. The silence was oppressive, each creak and echo magnified in the vast, empty space. As we reached the main reading area, Jonah paused, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I strained my ears, catching a faint sound that seemed like whispering. Dismissing it as the wind, I nodded towards the librarian's desk. "Let's check out the front desk," I suggested, eager to distance ourselves from the unsettling noises. The desk was a mess, papers strewn about, a thick layer of dust covering everything. As Jonah rifled through the drawers, I explored the area behind the counter. That's when I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound book. It was a journal, dated around the time of the murder. Curiosity piqued, I flipped it open, the pages musty under my fingertips. The entries were mundane at first, then increasingly paranoid. The librarian wrote of hearing voices late at night, of books found in different places from where she'd left them, of a presence she felt watching her. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, "I know he's here, and he's coming for me. I can't escape him." A cold chill ran down my spine, and I showed the journal to Jonah. "This is creepy, man," he said, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "Maybe we should." A sudden crash from the back of the library cut him off. Our heads snapped up, hearts hammering in our chests as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "This isn't funny anymore," I hissed, fear tightening its grip around me. "Let's get out of here." We hurried back towards the window we'd entered through, but as we passed the stacks, a shadow darted between the bookshelves. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Jonah, did you see that?" Before he could answer, another crash echoed through the library, closer this time. Panic surged through me, and we broke into a run. But as we neared the basement window, a figure stepped into the dim light, a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes hollow pits of darkness. His lips curled into a sinister smile as he advanced towards us. "We just wanted to leave," Jonah stammered, stepping back. The man's smile widened, but it was the smile of a predator cornering its prey. "Nobody leaves," he hissed, his voice a chilling echo of the whispers that haunted the library. I swung my flashlight at him, the heavy object connecting with a sickening thud. He staggered, momentarily disoriented, and we didn't hesitate. Scrambling to the window, we hoisted ourselves through the narrow opening, the cold night air a harsh contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. Once outside, we didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the streetlights, the library a dark silhouette against the night sky behind us. We looked at each other, our chests heaving, the terror of what had just happened written clear on our faces. "We can't tell anyone," Jonah said finally, a tremor in his voice. "Who would believe us?" I nodded, knowing he was right. The town's dark history, the library's secrets, they were layers of a story too terrifying to unravel. We walked home in silence, each lost in our thoughts, the weight of the night's horrors pressing down on us. I always knew the library as a sanctuary, a quiet place to escape the chaos of high school life. But for Tommy, it was the stage for his own personal hell. I remember watching him sometimes, his small, fragile frame hovering over the crime section, lost in a world that seemed to both terrify and captivate him. It was this fascination, this escape of his, that made him the perfect target. It started with teasing, the kind that's cruel but often dismissed by adults as kids being kids. But it escalated quickly. Jason and his friends would corner Tommy in the library, snatching his books away, calling him a freak because he read about serial killers and heinous crimes. I told them to stop once. Jason just laughed in my face and pushed past me, his gang following like a pack of wolves. Tommy never said much, just pulled his hood further over his eyes and waited for them to lose interest. But they never did. The more he shrank away, the more they pounced. I should have done more, I know that now. I should have stood up for him, reported it, but fear, of becoming their next target, always held me back. One particularly cold November afternoon, I found Tommy in his usual spot after school. The library was almost deserted, a faint echo of whispers filling the vast space. He was shaking, a book clutched tightly to his chest, his eyes darting around nervously. "Are you okay, Tommy?" I approached him cautiously, not wanting to startle him. He glanced up, his eyes wide and haunted. "It's going to stop," he whispered, more to himself than to me. I didn't understand then, but I nodded, offering a weak smile I hoped was comforting. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Jason and his friends boasted about their escapades less and less. The school buzzed with rumors of stolen items and mysterious vandalism. The incidents were petty at first, graffiti, broken windows, but they grew bolder, more disturbing. A teacher's car was found keyed with vile threats, a dead rat left in a bully's locker. The community was in uproar, parents demanding action, the police called in to investigate. Through it all, Tommy remained a shadow, his presence in the library unwavering. His section of interest, though, had shifted subtly, from true crime histories to forensics and criminal psychology. Then came the morning everything shattered. Jason was found in the boys' locker room, unconscious, a copy of In Cold Blood beside him, a book borrowed from the library, the due date slip still marking the page he'd been threatened on. The police were involved immediately. The school was locked down, everyone questioned, the atmosphere thick with accusations and fear. I saw Tommy that day in the police station, sitting alone, an officer by his side. He looked calm, eerily so. When our eyes met, he just stared at me, a knowing, almost pitiful look in his gaze. It was then I realized he had been planning this, taking notes, learning from the very books he'd been tormented for reading. The investigation led to the library. Hidden in a false bottom of the shelf in the crime section were Tommy's detailed journals. He had documented everything, the bullying, his thoughts, his plans. There were notes on each of his tormentors, their habits, their weaknesses. He had turned the library into his command center, the books his teachers, the journals his confession. The community reeled from the revelations. Tommy was taken into custody, a trial pending. The bullying stopped, but so too did any sense of normalcy at school. Conversations hushed when I passed, eyes darted away. I had tried to be his friend, but I had failed to truly help him. Now, the library stands as a monument not just to knowledge but to the dark turn a tormented mind can take. I visit sometimes, drawn to the place where it all unfolded. I sit in Tommy's corner, the crime section, and wonder about the fine line between victim and villain. Each book feels heavier now, each page a reminder of the power of words to both heal and harm. The silence of the library, once comforting, now echoes with a question that haunts me: could I have stopped it? Could I have saved Tommy from becoming the very thing he was obsessed with? I'd always found Mrs. Travers, the town librarian, to be a peculiar figure. With her severe buns, spectacles perpetually perched on her nose, and the stern hush that followed her like a shadow, she was as much a fixture of the library as the ancient oak shelves. But it was her eyes that unsettled me the most, sharp and penetrating, like she could see through to your very soul. As a high school junior with a penchant for mystery novels, I spent more afternoons at the library than anywhere else. It was on one such afternoon, beneath the flickering fluorescence of the gloomy building, that my suspicions about Mrs. Travers began to grow into something more concrete. I was tucked away in a secluded corner, flipping through a collection of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, when I overheard a hushed conversation. Mrs. Travers was speaking in urgent, whispered tones to another librarian. "It needs to be taken care of," she said, a hint of desperation threading her usually composed voice. "No, I'll handle it myself." Curiosity piqued, I peered around the bookshelf just in time to see her slipping through a door marked "Private," an area strictly off-limits to patrons. My interest, now fully ignited by the shroud of secrecy, refused to be stifled. I decided to investigate. The next day, I returned to the library at a time when I knew Mrs. Travers would be taking her long, solitary lunch break. The old building was nearly empty, save for the soft thud of books being reshelved in the distance. With my heart pounding against my ribs, I approached the forbidden door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. I hesitated, the air chilling as I contemplated what secrets lay below. Gathering my courage, I descended. The basement was dimly lit, the air thick with the musty odor of forgotten things. Rows of filing cabinets and stacks of dusty books lined the walls. As I ventured deeper, I noticed an area cordoned off with heavy velvet curtains, an unusual sight that felt strangely out of place. I drew the curtains aside, and my breath caught in my throat. Behind the curtains was a shrine, but not to any deity I'd ever known. Photos of missing local pets dotted the walls, each accompanied by what looked disturbingly like small, crudely made effigies. At the center of this macabre tableau was a larger photo, this one of a young girl who had vanished from our town a year ago, her disappearance still a mystery. Her image was framed by candles that looked recently extinguished, the wax still soft. Sickened, I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of books. As they hit the floor, a small, leather-bound journal tumbled out, landing at my feet. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The journal was filled with Mrs. Travers' handwriting, meticulous and tight. It detailed not only her interactions with the pets she had taken in, as she phrased it, but also her observations of the young girl, her habits, and places she frequented. The final entry was chilling: "It's time to welcome another." Horrified, I pocketed the journal just as I heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, I hid behind a large filing cabinet, my entire body shaking. Mrs. Travers entered the basement, muttering to herself. She paused at the shrine, lighting the candles once more before placing a fresh photo on the wall, a photo of another child from town who had started coming to the library recently. I waited, heart pounding, until she left the basement. Then, I bolted, rushing home faster than I ever thought possible. At home, I locked myself in my room and called the police, my voice cracking as I relayed everything I had found. The investigation that followed was swift and horrifying. Mrs. Travers was arrested, and the full extent of her crimes came to light. The basement held not just the shrine but hidden compartments where she kept mementos from her victims, both human and animal. The town reeled from the revelations, the horror of what had been hiding beneath the veneer of an eccentric librarian shaking our small community to its core.